Welcome to Town Hall number 178. Today we're going to devote the entire time to hear Admiral Ben Wachendorf. Ben is one of our most popular speakers, and you can watch his prior talks on the SMA Wins YouTube channel. And Admiral Wachendorf will share his perspectives from this week's 36th National Symposium held by the Surface Navy Association. Ben will offer his insights into the challenges the U.S. Navy faces across the globe protecting our interests worldwide. Ben retired from the Navy as a Rear Admiral. He commanded the most highly decorated ship in the U.S. history, which is the USS Parchi. He was also the former U.S. Defense Attaché to Moscow, Navy Director of Strategy and Policy, former Chief of Staff for Joint Forces Command, and held many positions with distinction. Ben has also been with SMA since 2013, and we've enjoyed having him here the entire time. He's a great guy. So during the presentation, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat. So I understand the conference has been really effective. There's been a lot of activity. You've got to meet great people, and I think I even heard that you got to have a conversation with the CEO of Austal in the coffee line.
We did. It's a tremendous conference for networking. One of the reasons it's compact, it's crammed into the two lower levels of the High Regency in Crystal City. So there's not a lot of room to spread out in, and that really makes for a lot of impromptu meetings. And yes, I happened to be in the espresso line and bumped into the president of Austal. That was a nice meeting. I got AJ to meet her and also Chuck as well.
Excellent. I'm sure that Pete will be very thankful, given he wasn't able to make the event. That's great to get connected to our clients.
Yes.
And I think you also had some great conversations with some of our other clients. I know you and I were talking this morning a little bit about Boeing, and some of the conversations you had with NASCO as well.
Some of the existing clients I got to see were NASCO, an active client with us in shipbuilding. Some new clients on the horizon, Saab Defense, and also a longtime client of our Spartan Corporation that makes sonobuoys and other undersea warfare. And again, they're all team efforts. I had AJ along, Chuck along, or others with me in tow as we met up with these clients. So very productive.
That's fantastic. I think we had Chuck, you, Andrea was there, Ryan Sherman, AJ was there, and Ben was there.
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. Tom, thanks for spending a little time with us. And Ben, without any further ado, over to you.
Hey, thanks. My name's Ben Wachendorf. I've talked to many of you before. I appreciate the opportunity to do it again. I'll try to be brief. I think we have 30 minutes, but I would plan to only speak for 10 to 15 to allow questions and discussion, because in my experience, that usually is what people value most. My background was a Navy nuclear submarine officer. I was in the Navy for 38 years. I retired in 2008, ran 3 small companies, venture capital startups after that, and spent about, 10, 12 years with SMA in different capacities. But I certainly don't pretend to tell you anything here that is sensational, or I'm just trying to put into context from the conference we just had what we learned and what I see as the way ahead. I guess this has to be prefaced by the world today and some security concerns that we all know about. There's a war in Ukraine that has gone on now for well over a year. It's at a stalemate phase and has big implications for certainly NATO and Russia. There's a war in Gaza that, in my opinion, doesn't have an end in sight, and a great deal of suffering. You have a quasi-war going on in the Red Sea with Yemen and the Houthis. I'll talk a little bit more of that from a Navy perspective in just a minute. And then there's national level violence in countries like Ecuador or Southeast Asia that are also causes of great concern. I think to put into context the Navy perspective that I'd like to put out, I'd like to first just try to identify why naval power, or navies in general, are important. 80% of the world's population lives within 200 miles of an ocean. interestingly, when I was doing some research here, 10% of the world's population lives 10 meters or less above sea level. And if you think of global warming or just tsunamis or 10-foot storm surge from a hurricane, that has implications. 90% of global trade, and you have to be careful how you measure this, but goes by sea, at least parts of it. And over 95% of all international communications go via undersea cables. And so it's important not just to the United States, to many countries. A peacetime example of how an impact of something like the closure of the Suez Canal can have is afforded by, I believe it was 2001, there was an Evergreen ship that ran aground in the Suez Canal and closed it effectively for over a week. And that canal handles 12% of the world's global trade every day. And when that's closed, that has a lot of impact. Effectively, it's closed right now because 6 of the 10 largest international shippers are not sending their ships through the Suez Canal because of the violence associated with the Houthis in the Red Sea. All right, now to the Navy perspective. The pacing threat defined by multiple administrations is China. There are many other things the Navy has to do, but what is driving the requirements is a very rapid expansion of Chinese military power, particularly in their naval forces. The many ways I could describe that, but I don't want to waste too much time. I think that I was speaking at a War College event just earlier this week, and there's a couple ways of thinking about this. One is what some people call a saddle point or a mini-max. Without being a mathematician or going into differential equations or anything, if you think of a horse saddle and you were to dissect it lengthwise, in the back, it goes down, hits a nadir, and then goes up, and that's where you sit on it. Okay, fine. Some people describe the U.S. military in general in that category. After the Cold War is over, good guys won, cut back defense spending, have many two wars going on in the Middle East, but a lot of things we weren't doing, including buying ordnance and building a lot of new platforms. We're coming out of that now. And that describes in that saddle curve, perhaps, U.S. military capabilities. But if you take that same saddle and twist it 90 degrees and cut it, I call it athwartships, but across the stirrups, then it goes up and hits an apex at the same point that the other cut is hitting a low point. That's called a mini-max. And it could be argued that China today is on the curve that is upside down, the saddle curve, and we're on the upper curve. And we're both approaching that mini-max point, which is a very dangerous time. I say China has certainly risen, but they've got a lot of problems. The president Xi has recently admitted that their economy is in difficulty. They have decreasing population trends, which was a precursor to many of Russia's problems. They have basically call it civil war or genocide or whatever you will, but they've got 12 million Uyghurs that are in basically one province, and they're Muslim, and they're sort of prisoners in camps. And I'm not trying to spin a political thing here, but that's a big challenge for them. China also has an issue with its younger people and the information age and transitioning to the economy that they form. They have a totalitarian government. They don't have freedom of the press. That gives them many advantages for doing some things, but over time puts them in a position that they can see the future, at least President Xi can. And in my view, that makes it very dangerous for countries like Taiwan, because he's watching the U.S. progress and his own situation. I hope I'm wrong about that, but we'll see. Others have echoed my concern in that area. Now, I'll just go on for a couple more minutes about the challenges that the Navy faces. I think the number one challenge is people. whether it's a military organization or a business like SMA or the clients SMA serves, I think people are always the most important asset of any organization. That's certainly true about the United States Navy. And last year, the Navy fell 20% short of its recruiting goals. That has a very negative effect, and it snowballs for promotions, advancements, and retention, and other important things dealing with people. I mentioned before that a series of, in my view, bad decisions through multiple administrations were made to allow Congress to build new things that they like in their district. In the case of the Navy, it's ships, but this also applies to other services. But they didn't get the money to maintain those investments. And so to cover that shortfall, the Navy, over 10 years, made bad decisions with the value of hindsight for doing things like stopping making torpedoes. We haven't built a torpedo in the United States for 12 years. They have grossly cut back the number of missiles. More on missiles in just a minute, but they are in very low inventory. When the war in Ukraine came up and we pushed 5 destroyers out of Norfolk to the Mediterranean, the limiting component for getting them underway was finding enough missiles that they could put on their ship. Not people, not engines or anything else, just getting ordnance. And there's a huge maintenance backlog. This includes airplanes, but I'm focused on ships primarily. There's 18 nuclear submarines that are currently in shipyard maintenance that are delayed and overdue. That's about 25% of our force, actually 30% of our force. And that's not right. Shouldn't be that way. Those are avoidable things. Now let me go on to just a couple more challenges. And these are Navy challenges, but they're not unique to the Navy. As we see in Ukraine and we're seeing right now in the Red Sea, some people call this asymmetric warfare. But without trying to sound like a commercial, if you've seen the movie, either of them, Top Gun, Maverick, whatever, or Hunt for Red October, that kind of stuff, anybody who wants to take the Navy on in those environments is going to lose, flat out, including China, in my view. But adversaries know our strengths and also know our weaknesses. And as Russia has seen in the Ukraine, they've had terrible losses over there. And they've lost well over half of all their armored forces in their country. 90% of the invading forces by number that started the war have been either killed or wounded. Ukraine's also suffered greatly. But it is shown that by using drones and missiles, it's very hard to protect population or high-value military targets. We are vulnerable to that. We're also vulnerable to what, and this is my final point, I'll open up for questions, what I call misinformation. We live in an information age, and I don't have a political agenda here, but with a very short news cycle, it's very easy to put out misinformation and influence events. And that's certainly a societal challenge. Many ways you could look at this, but it's also has some security implications. And that's all I'll say about that, but I probably talked enough. Let me close on a high point. It was 48 hours ago that the Houthis, that are the rebel force that is attacking shipping coming out of the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, made 21 strikes. It included one ballistic anti-ship missile that had a closure speed of about 3 times the speed of sound, 2 low-flying anti-ship cruise missiles that are very small radar cross-section, fly low just off the water and at about 600 miles an hour, and 18 drones that were armed, all within 24 hours coming after shipping in the area that they were trying to close. And the United States Navy destroyed every one of those targets. That's because good people out there working really hard, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's no other force that could do that. I'm not throwing stones at the Air Force or the Army or the Marines, but it's the United States Navy that's doing that, and they're doing it very well. So enough of that. I could either take questions verbally or go through chat. What would be the best way ahead here?
Yeah, I think there's a question in the chat, Ben.
Sure, just a second. Let me open it up.
Yeah, I can read it to you. Says,
Okay.
do you see the Navy taking concrete steps to move away from just-in-time logistics and back to resilience?
Yes, belatedly late. And AJ and Tom Hernandez and others were at this conference this week in Crystal City, just outside National Airport in Washington, and that was admitted. The short story is just-in-time logistics works great if you are in a business and if you're trying to reduce inventory costs and if you're trying to have a stable level production, and that's fine. But national security doesn't work that way, and there are spikes and unpredictable events. And there's no better example of this than in ammunition, weapons inventories. This includes not just torpedoes, but missiles, sonobuoys, all kinds of things like that. But that has been recognized and it is being corrected. I'm going to sound like a bureaucrat because I was one. The military doesn't make good business decisions, and it takes a long time to correct them. Just as a statement of fact, it's in the news today. A big huzzah about what they call FY24 budget and government shutdowns, and I'll stay out of that. That's one budget. There's another budget that has already been to all the secretaries of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Secretary of Defense, and is in the White House, called the Office of Management and Budget. So that's the next year budget, FY25. The FY26 budget, the one after that, is all but written. It's being reviewed at the highest levels of the Pentagon, and it'll be what they call locked or unable to change easily in 6 weeks. So if someone were to say, I want more directed energy weapons right now to shoot down these drones, which is what the CNO and the head of the Surface Navy has said, and had all the money in the world to do that, it would take 24 months to get that money authorized. Now, that's an oversimplification of a lot of things. It's a problem, but the short answer is we didn't do well in that area in the past, and we're fixing it.
Yeah.
What's next?
I've got a few questions, Jacques, unless there's others.
There's one more in the chat, AJ, but if you'd like to kick it off, we can hold that one until you've asked your questions.
Okay. I think, Ben, at the conference, really a fabulous conference. Though, it's interesting. I've gone to many of the talks, but there's very little actual talk about AUKUS. And I'm not sure why. I would have thought that perhaps it would have been a little bit more of a highlight around the discussions, but can you perhaps help our audience understand what AUKUS is about and just talk a little bit about kind of where you think the Navy is on AUKUS?
The military has a bunch of acronyms, and one of them, the newer ones, is called AUKUS, AUKUS, and it stands for Australia, UK, United States. It's a head of state signed agreement, not a treaty per se, but there's strong support in those three countries to provide Australia with technology focused primarily in nuclear attack submarines. But that same agreement has spread out to cover many different things, from artificial intelligence to sensors and other technology. I will say that one of the reasons I think, AJ, they don't talk a lot about this because some of it is still being defined as to what they can say or ask for or do.
Oh, okay.
Because there are a lot of rules about foreign technology transfer, and that's even for unclassified things.
Yeah, and there's foreign navies here at the conference, so that makes sense. Yeah,
and so Congress is changing the laws to allow more of that. If you know what ITAR is and things like that they're being changed, but the progress and this is a surface warfare conference, so you don't hear a lot of people, submarines are a dirty word because they're so expensive and they take a lot of their money, and then they're true. Now, what submariners will say, there's really only two types of ship in any Navy, submarines and targets, and the reason they're buying submarines is because everything else is the target. And that's an exaggeration. I'll let that
So,
go.
so one more question before we get to some really good questions from Matt and Neil and even Peter. So, earlier this morning I had the privilege of attending a conference, a session that Admiral James Downey, the new head of NAVC, moderated. Really interesting panel. He had PO ships. He had a bunch of folks there, and I was really actually quite surprised by the comment that the person that's kind of helping to manage all the aircraft carrier construction programs, it's a lot of that going on, actually talked about how the U.S. is helping the French on their carrier programs. So that was something that was really new to me.
Yes. There's been an on again, off again thing with France going all the way back to de Gaulle and NATO, and they were a political part of NATO, but not a military part. When I worked with Jim Mattis and he turned over his NATO hat to a French general, very much in the military, I was associated with those discussions. It's a complicated subject. At the end of the day, France is an ally, and they are a NATO member, and they do have nuclear power capability proven over decades. And I think one of the ways to help make up for not having as many ships as the United States Navy would want to have is to work better with ships that our allies already have or plan to build. That's behind AUKUS and others. So I think, we're helping France. And we have had Navy aircraft land on French aircraft carriers and vice versa and operate, not just touch and goes. And that sounds simple, but it's not, because you got to have parts. You got to have all the right knickknacks, doodads, hoses, and things to take care of them. It's not trivial, but they've done that. And we've also done that with the Brits. The Marines have had F-35 deployments on the British aircraft carrier for, I think, 5 months. So that kind of cooperation, that's another reason that the Navy, other services have international cooperation, but it's easier for the Navy because they can come in, they can go, they can make port calls, they can stay out of sight if politically that's the right answer. If there's a military thing, they're very flexible. Whereas in some of the high overhead land-based events, it gets a little more challenging.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, they had actually talked a lot about it's a significant effort to make our own carriers F-35 capable. So, Jacques, why don't we go back to, I think, speaking of F-35s, we have Matt Winter. He asked a question. Matt was one of the former heads of the F-35 Joint Program Office. Jacques, do you want to read the question from Matt?
Yes. First off, it says, nice global overview, and he concurs with the U.S. Navy focus areas. With respect to this year's SNA Symposium, what were the key messages from the senior Navy leadership or leadership itself, specifically SecNav, CNO, SWO boss, NAVC, et cetera, that actually made you stop and think that our Navy is moving in the correct or different direction to get after the challenges in a meaningful and practical way?
Yeah, Matt, boy, we could talk about that all day. I'd say at the CNO highest end level, who just recently was fully, full up round, and I think just this week is getting a vice chief. She was doing 2 jobs with one very difficult situation. But this was one of her first in-office public speeches. It got some press coverage, and she, to answer your question, gave me inspiration that she gets it and we're going the right way, because she said it's not about numbers. In the past, for whatever reason, Congress certainly being one of them, we've had goals and numbers and things. And what CNO said is we need to do a better job of getting what we have ready to fight today. And I thought that message was loud and clear. The SWO boss he's also new in his job, I think less than a month or so, but his amongst his perspectives that impressed me that he gets it were the results of personnel surveys he had done for sailors across his force and all seniorities, junior, senior, and the importance of trying to help young sailors from the day they get on board the ship. He said, every once in a while, we still have a sailor that shows up unannounced. Nobody expected him to show up on a ship. And even if it's an aircraft carrier with a, ship's company complement of 4,000 or what, that should never happen because you only get one chance to make a first impression. And he emphasized that. He talked about ensigns who are going to commercial simulators. As an aviator, Matt, you identify with this. That's very common in aviation. It hasn't been so much so since until after the 2017 collisions, but the Surface Navy made a great investment in very capable ship simulation trainers, as the commercial ship driver schools have always done. And they are required before they ever set foot on a ship to get a certification basically as a master of handling ships. And ensigns going on our destroyers are embarrassed because in some cases they know more about ship handling than their superior officers on that ship. So that's good news, bad news, sorry. but you have the SWOT boss talking about it. So yeah, I think people are getting, and I don't want to sound like I've got a crystal ball. My opinion is no better than anybody else's. But when you get back to that mini-max and danger point with China, I think that's driving a lot of this.
Hey, Ben, this is Matt. If I can hijack just for a second.
Please.
And thanks. I'm 3.5 miles from Crystal City, but I'm not capable of going down there. This is my first SNA miss in a decade. And CNO, Lisa, used to be Lisa, now it's CNO, and Vice Chief used to be Jim. I think we've got good leadership in that front office. I think the politics, though, is putting pressure and clouding some of the warfighting priorities. And that's my concern. And so when you look out to the west and the PACOM and PAC fleet work and the work that SMA does from a data analytics and ensuring that we understand things from an objective data driven way, I'm concerned that we'll continue to fund thousands of things instead of the couple of three that are really going to move the needle. And Congress wants numbers and products and outcomes. I like Lisa's, the CNO's focus on a range. We don't fight with a specific thing. Don't say 355. Say we need to fight with what we have tonight, which is 298. We need more. But if you put a number on that, then everybody chases number instead of chasing capability and trained sailors. So I like what you're saying there. I just didn't get a chance to get down there. So I really do like your global overview. And for folks that don't live in that every day, that was very well done, Ben. Thanks. Over.
Thanks, Matt. And I know we're running short of time, but just one more sound point on that SWOBOS thing. One of the things that he and his senior flags advocate or were very proud of, and it's directly responsible for the success we're seeing in the Red Sea, is the Navy has things called doctrine or lessons learned and procedures. And those are being turned around literally in 24 hours based upon new threats and new information that they see. And that never used to be the case. And so that's a good news story.
Wow. I'd like to add a comment to the discussion, Ben, you and Matt. So Matt, this morning at NAVSEA's briefing, right? The head of IWS, so this is where the weapon systems are developed out of, right? They talked about having a portfolio of 750 programs. I was astounded when you think about how the monies get dispersed, right?
So the average PEO has somewhere between 500 and 600 programs. They have between 1 and 12 program offices, and they're allocated across. IWS is I'll say the jack of all trades, right? Because they service everybody. It's sort of like PEO UNW on the air side. And Seiko is she's a phenomenal leader. And that's a great place. That's a great place to learn for this group here. If you want to get a quick inoculation on technical refresh and I'll say acquisition excellence, and system of systems integration and development. PEOIWS is a great place to study over.
Interesting. Phenomenal number of programs in the portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ben, if you've got a little more time, this has created quite a buzz, and so I'd certainly like to give people an opportunity to hear you answer their questions.
Sure. I'm looking at chat, and Peter Sherman had a question about LSM. Just today, there was an announcement that the request for proposals were going out. There was a joke that I heard, probably shouldn't say who said it, but it was a very senior person. And they were talking about the whatever 100-year anniversary of the Navy and all that. And then they said there was the Marine Corps. And since that day in the 1700s, the Navy and the Marine Corps have never agreed on the number of amphibious ship requirements, which is inside the Pentagon humor. But the bottom line is the Marine Corps has changed a lot. And I worked for a great guy named Jim Mattis, who was part of that. They are a very lethal force, and they want to be agile, flexible, mobile, and really empower small units using technology to have great combat power. And a big piece of that is what Peter's asking about, the landing ship medium. It's been called different things, and I'll probably change names again with political factors, but it's designed to take a heavy platoon of Marines into the outer island rings against China and do a lot of good things. And there is progress today reported on that. What's next?
Let's see, from I think it was from Tom. Says, many thanks. Could you address potential naval lessons learned from the Ukraine conflict? Significant Russian losses.
The Russian Black Sea Fleet is ineffective. It's been shot up underway. Their flagship in port, LST, Alligator LST. They've had inability to stop drones, both surface and subsurface. And there are a lot of lessons learned out of that. Some of these get classified, but those are being looked at very closely.
Including our own lessons in terms of how those drones are controlled instead of not relying on a commercial provider.
Right.
Yes, exactly so.
So another one, Ben. Let's see, you mentioned the younger Chinese generation with access to the World Wide Web information. And so how do you think they will influence China's aggression?
Difficult for me to say. I would have a lot of experience in Russia, including being a defense attaché over there. I periodically get briefed at a all source level on both China and Russia, so I have some insight there. It's important to note that China is not a free society. There is no freedom of the press. Tiananmen Square was many years ago, but that was just one example. My point is, for both Russia and China, and pretty much, I guess, the United States too, but once a genie comes out of the bottle, it's hard to put it back in. And the information age that we live in isn't going back. And you can have state-controlled television and newspapers, but that's not going to stop the flow of information, and that's only going to accelerate. The younger people of China are seeing that. I have read reports without discussing some more sensitive things, but it's been openly reported in the press that the younger people in China are not wanting to work in the assigned tasks. They want to do their own kinds of things. That has big implications in a society that's top-down driven like China. So time will tell. But I think that is a cause of growing concern for President Xi, who, by the way, just replaced his entire military leadership. And sort of like us for a few days, I still don't think they know where the Secretary of Defense is.
Oh, boy. Hey, so another question. So China's been building artificial island bases, and isn't this an added security risk to the U.S.? And what actions
absolutely.
can we take for protection?
That goes back to Peter's question about the Marines. But yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant. It most certainly is a security issue. There are international law disputes involved in this. It's very clear China's strategy, what they're trying to do. They've said they're going to do it, and they're very patient. And let me not try to give an impression that the Chinese are not capable. This is the country that invented gunpowder and has had other stellar achievements over the years, as had Russia. But my point is, it does present a very significant military challenge to us, and we are taking that on. And when we take it on, it's going to be a naval flight. It's not going to be bombers out of Barksdale to solve that problem.
Right. So Ben, what's your thoughts on the the risk and threat associated with hypersonics and our ability to defend against those?
Yeah, the hypersonics have been out there for quite some time. I guess it was maybe 15 years ago, Chinese bought from Russia. And they either buy technology or steal it. There's a little bit of indigenous, but most of it's bought or stolen and copied. I'm not emotional about that. It's just a fact. So they bought the Submarine guided missile cruiser from Russia. They didn't need the ship so much. What they wanted is the missile system that went with it, and that has a supersonic anti-ship capability with a wiggle at the end that presents a lot of challenges. They bought it, they copied it, and they've improved it. They've incorporated it into a whole family of missiles, and the slope or rate of change of their not just numbers but quality curves is astounding, much faster than ours. They have more ships in their Navy today than we do, and they're building them faster. So is that a problem? Yes. Are we aware it's a problem? Yes. Can we handle that problem today? Yes. I'm worried about tomorrow.
Absolutely. So Ben, what are your thoughts regarding resolving the Navy recruiting problem? Of course, we'd like your thoughts about the upcoming U.S. presidential election and your thoughts about that as well. Two questions, actually.
Yeah, I have very strong feelings about the upcoming election, but I don't think it's appropriate for a former flag officer to express those. If anybody wants to ask me a question personally, one-on-one, my opinion is not any better than any others, but I've got some scar tissue here, and enough said on that. I'm sorry, the
recruiting.
Yeah, okay, that's a tough nut. We've had recruiting problems in the past. When we ended the draft, it was answered by raising pay. I think the best solution to recruiting is better leadership. And I'm working with AJ. This isn't something that should be widely advertised, but the military in general, Navy particularly, has had much more than they should have of what they call unplanned losses, particularly at the CO and XO level. These are ship squadron facility senior officers of maybe 20 years experience that were selected for the job, doing the job, and were let go early because of something they did or didn't do. And that shouldn't happen. So we need better leadership. I can tell you a lot of stories, but I was briefing, well, that'll take too long. We're out of time. But young people today are the Navy's greatest asset.
Yeah.
I was touring the Russian chairman of the Joint Chiefs of a nuclear aircraft carrier in Norfolk, and what he saw, petty officers. These are enlisted sailors, very well trained, very competent, maybe 25, 28 years old. And the operations they were doing, electronically, weapon systems, maintenance, he was blown away by that. Because that's Russia doesn't have anything like that. Neither does anybody else. But we've got to retain those people and bring them in. So short answer is leadership. There'll be others who say, well, just takes more money, buy our way out of it. No, I don't think so.
I have a few comments on that, Ben. I actually had a chance, and I know we're talking about perhaps doing some, proposing some ideas to the Navy on a couple of things, including leadership. I actually was able to attend Vice Admiral Cheeseman's talk. He's the head of Navy personnel.
Right.
And I have to say, it was unlike any other HR personnel talk I ever actually listened to, and it was inspiring. A couple of interesting. They're really trying a couple of pilot projects would look interesting. One of them actually, is they actually now are willing to accept folks to enlist up to the age of 42. Believe it or not, but they have a whole bunch of pods going on. But I just wanted to share some numbers with people. So I found this really interesting for the Navy, and the Navy is doing actually a much better job than some of the other services. The Army, we know, has a really particularly challenging problem. But the Navy, in order to meet their FY24 goal, they actually need to go to boot camp. 175 new sailors to go to boot camp every single day. Just think about that, right? And what they start out with is, here's their pipeline. They start out with kind of indications of interest from 10,400. That gets necked down to only 1,230 appointments. This is what last year's numbers are, right? Only 879 of those show up for the interview. Those of which are qualified and interested are 366 of the 879. They send the packages out to 253 people at the end of the day. And of the 253, they can only onboard 140. And then from there, 120 end up going to boot camp. Those numbers I found to be super interesting. When you look at it, what it has to be on a daily basis, it's astounding. And that's for the Navy. Imagine what it is for the Army.
Yeah. Did he talk about the physical requirements? There's
He did.
a great
Yeah, he
percentage
did.
of our population that's not qualified physically.
Yeah, even though they're talking about not reducing the standards, I interpret that as a little bit of a relaxation of the standards. Also around high school grades, they actually have instituted 2 programs at the high school level around physical fitness and around academics, right? And so those are 2 other pilots that he spoke about. So I think what's really interesting, and SMA has had a really significant interest in helping the military across the board in terms of the recruiting challenge. We've had extensive conversations with the Army. I think what's really interesting here is that I think the Navy's actually has been looking at this from a really good, solid discipline perspective. But what they're not really understanding is why people fall out of the pipeline. They really have a good understanding of why people kind of tend to stay in and how that occurs. But what they really don't understand is kind of the reasons why people basically fall out of the pipeline, which I think is super important.
Yep.
Well, I think we've gotten to the end of the questions, and I think that Ben, thank you for hanging in here with us and answering a plethora of questions. And AJ, thank you for your comments as well, and Matt. It was an incredible town hall. But before we finish, I want to mention that even though we didn't have a time to present an art talk on Christo and his wife Jean-Claude, it is posted on the SMA Wins YouTube channel, so check it out. It's really interesting. I love the wrap of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Also, mark your calendars because next week we will feature the SMA BD team and discuss upcoming opportunities, which I know is a really big favorite of everybody out there. So have a great weekend, and we will see you next Thursday. Bye.